Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. And today, I don't know where we're going. Jerry Glenn is someplace out in outer space. He's got the world behind him. And I'm pretty sure that Paul Werbos is in his home in near Washington, D.C. We're going to, those are two guys who know each other already. And you guys are going to get acquainted with them too, because I think this is going to be an interesting discussion about our future, the world's future. I think we need to get on to solving that before it all happens to us, right? Jerome Glenn is the head of the Millennium Project, which is, I don't know how to describe it, except that it is a group of people who work on anticipating the future and the issues and problems that are likely to emerge as we move into the future. And he's got a group of people working on various projects all over the world. So he will explain that to us in a bit. And Paul Werbos is a friend of his and a friend of mine by now. In fact, one of my very favorite people. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Metta.
Good.
I've really enjoyed our discussions.
Well, we're going to have another one. And Paul is a mathematician. He is, I would be so bold to say, maybe the founder of the new, he didn't know he was doing it, but the new artificial intelligence, because he wrote a PhD thesis at Harvard many years ago, which has now become the basis for new things. And so I don't know a damn thing about artificial intelligence, but one of these days he's going to explain it all to me without mathematics. And I've just been learning that the United Nations has produced a new report called something about our agenda.
Our common agenda.
Our common. So, Jerry, would you start at the beginning again and explain to me what you were saying, that I, as an intelligent woman, I should know about this, and I don't. So,
as a matter of fact, all of your listeners should know about this. So what I'd like them to do, if they had a pencil and paper right next to them, write down our common agenda, and then UNSG, United Nations Secretary General. That's the most forward-looking document that I have ever seen come out of this Secretary General's office, and I can't even think of a close second. If you get that report, you can download it. You can do a search on it. You'll find something like 13 to 17 references to foresight, unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 5 elements in there that are future oriented that weren't there before. Council is Trusteeship Council.
Mm-hmm.
Trusteeship Council, for those of you who don't know, was originally set up in the UN as 1/5 or 1/6 major section of the UN, major chunk of the UN, to help this is after 45, to help the transition from colonial states to independent states, which is a massive job worldwide. And so they had a very big entity. Well, now most of that work is done. So here you have this gigantic part of the UN twiddling his thumb.
I believe that there are just a handful of places in the world still governed by the Trusteeship Council. So it does look like a perfect thing that you could capture and repurpose.
Exactly. That's the exact word the Secretary uses, is repurpose. And what he wants to repurpose it as is a multi-stakeholder foresight body. Now let's unpack that. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Multi-stakeholder. You don't have multi-stakeholder bodies in the UN. The closest we have is the ILO, because that's governments, businesses, and labor unions, right? But it's not necessarily all the stakeholders. But in any case, that's the closest that exists in the UN right now. Otherwise, everything else is like nation state sort of thing.
Well, there's ECOSOC with these affiliate organizations.
That's different. I'm not talking about affiliates. Yeah. That's different, because you got affiliates in all parts of the UN.
Okay.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about You sit there and you are part of the formal game, not the one you get a carbon copy of.
Uh-huh.
So the idea would be that the trusteeship council could have governments in there, as well as businesses in there, as well as universities in there, as well as NGOs, maybe individuals in their own right. So how that gets organized was discussed at the UN General Assembly just a couple of weeks ago, and they said, okay, they didn't say no to it. What they said is that would require a change in the UN Charter and a ratification of the General Assembly. Okay, but that means it's not going to happen tomorrow morning. But let's take the second part of it, a multi-stakeholder foresight body. So its job would be to figure out future possibilities for the world. Not just nation states figuring that out, not just universities figuring out, but a multi-stakeholder group for the world. That doesn't exist anywhere. That's a unique thing. Now, how that gets done between here and there will be a lot of ups and downs all over the place, and it may never happen. But in any case, that's one of the elements. A second element is they're going to have a General Assembly in 2023 on the general future. Believe it or not, that's never been done. There's been the future of climate, there's been the future of poverty, there's been all kinds of different, but not the general future. Where are we all going? All right. So that's supposedly in a couple of years, so you can get ready for that one. And this is where the strategic threats come in. You're supposed to do periodic reports on threats to the world, including strategic threats, including the things that Paul and I have been talking about on your show. They're supposed to be in the report. What's the status of that? Which includes what we don't know that we ought to know, and therefore what research ought to be done to plug up those holes. Another one is called a futures lab. To be defined. It's wide open. And that's one of the things the Millennium Project has been asked to do, is we may do an assessment around the world of how these things ought to be done. So we're going to be asking futures. If there is a futures lab of the United Nations, what ought it to be? All right, let's define it.
That's a fascinating question. All of these open up.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Another one is an envoy for future generations. In other words, now, again, these things, how they get implemented may be different than what I'm talking about, all right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the idea is a representative of future generations. In other words, like when you deliberate something, how does this affect generation 2, 3, 4 down the road? And that function can go to UNDP, UNESCO, the Secretariat, UN University, ILO. Like, how do we consider future generations' impact of what you're doing in whatever UN activity you're doing? That's also new.
Now, has he mentioned all of these as possible agencies or branches or compartments of the UN, or are these
to be defined?
Okay.
All right. I mean, that's one of the reasons the Millennium Project has been asked to look at this.
Okay.
But some of them are specific and some are less. Like the UN transition with it. I keep forgetting all these terms. Too many things in my political here. The Trusteeship Council. The Trusteeship Council, that's relatively it's precise about what the institutional part would be. What's not precise is how do you implement that? How do you figure out who the multi-stakers are? How are they? How are they included?
And how do you make it fair? Because
exactly.
My concern would be what's going to happen is the corporations are going to grab everything. That's a place where they could belong. But if you start putting corporations in there with churches being the other or something, it's really going to be an interesting combination of.
Right. So step one is to say, here are changes within the UN. Now, if we agree with them as a generalization, then how do we do it for real? What do you implement? How is it done? And that's the next step.
Okay, well, what you haven't said, and I was expecting it because everybody talks about that right away when we talk about UN reform, is something like a parliamentary assembly in which the people are, the members are represented,
Right.
right? They're representing individual human beings
Right.
rather than states.
Right.
And
Well,
I think that is really crucial.
Right. Well, that was part of the original discussion of the UN in 45. And that part did not get done.
Mhm.
And the compromise was called the World Federation of UN Associations. What that is, the compromise was any country can create their own People's Assembly for the UN, called a UN association. And they have a right automatically to be part of the World Federation of UN Associations. The Millennium Project was underneath that, by the way, for a couple of years.
Hmm.
We've moved around a lot. Anyway, that's another story for a different show. But the World Federation of UN Association is the closest thing to the People's Assembly.
Mhm.
Now,
Well, that's not very close. I have better ideas.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not very close. I understand that. And so then the question comes up: do you create a new thing in the UN,
Mhm.
or do you take WFUNA, it's called WFUNA World Federation, and somehow upgrade that? You can upgrade that probably without changing the charter, but if you created a new thing within there, then you'd probably have to do the charter. And they couldn't get agreement before. Maybe they can get agreement now, but they couldn't get agreement before. So I would suggest that WFUNA gets upgraded.
Say that word again. Photo.
WFUNA, yeah, it's a terrible abbreviation. It's the World Federation of UN Associations. So it's WFUNA, UN Association.
WFUNA.
World Federation.
It does. Okay.
You know, between the Trusteeship Council and the World Federation, we're gonna have a hard time here.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, it's a World Federation of UN Associations. So just like there's a UN Association in the United States, there's a UN Association of France.
That
They
doesn't amount to much. I
No,
mean,
that's
we
what
have one in Canada. Well, there is one in Canada, and it's just like
Yeah.
any other NGO.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
it doesn't have any. It's not spectacular at all. I think I'm not sure whether I belong or not. I think I have sort of, you know, but
Right.
it's not a big deal. No, I think what we need is a totally different kind of world parliament, but I don't want it to be mediated by nation states. That's what I'm trying. I think what our future, the most important thing to abolish some of the main problems we have now is to find ways of organizing human beings into aggregates, but not aggregating them as nations within borders. I want to get away from borders and nation states, which I think are just completely irrational. And they
are occurring, as Paul well knows. IEEE is an aggregate of people, experts around the world on certain issues. Those kind of, and it has real power because it sets standards on things. You know, are you IEEE compliant, etc.
Tell me about that, Paul, because I don't know the first thing about that.
Oh, okay. What scares me is that the new problems we're facing, like with climate, like with the internet, like with fake news and vulnerability and cyber warfare, these problems are not the kind of problems which can be solved in the old way. We need a higher level of information processing and a higher level of intelligence. And that requires new structures. And when I try to say that there's hope, when I try to say that a new UN office could, in principle, say something useful about these threats of extinction to humanity, I always come back and I say, well, I can think of a couple of examples where the human organizations were good enough. And they weren't perfect, but they were a starting point. And one of the examples I give is, in fact, IEEE. IEEE, last I checked, had more than 400,000 members all over the world.
We should explain what it is.
It's the
IEEE 's
world's- yeah, it's the world's largest professional scientific organization. In a way, it's big brother to some other organizations that are in the same ballpark, like the aerospace engineers.
But hold on, it stands for International Electrical Engineers or something like that.
Years ago, they decided to change. Originally, it was the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. And then as it started taking on more and more areas, because you need scientific review and relevance and international collaboration in a lot of fields that require depth and understanding of the math. And so it became more than just electrical engineering. It certainly includes the Computer Society. It includes a lot of things. So they said, from now on, it's just IEEE. That's all it is. It doesn't stand for anything. But I remember visiting a congressional office once representing IEEE. And one of the staffers was, what in the world is this IEEE? I said, well, your guy runs for office, right? I said, right. Okay. The person who is president of IEEE runs for office with a constituency of about 500,000, most of whom are PhDs who won't believe a word you say in English. And in fact, they learned English as a second language, and they won't really believe it unless you have the math. Right. And they doubt anything you say. And you got to win an election all across the whole planet Earth. Would you have respect for a person who wins that kind of election? Maybe he would be worth listening to, especially if he knows all of the modern technologies much better than any of the bullshit lobbyists who are knocking on your door every day. So the president of IEEE has often had good meetings with presidents of nations that wanted economic development. And I said, gee, how can we get economic development? We need technology. Where's the biggest honest player in technology? Not somebody trying to sell us his gummy bears, but trying to really encompass the whole thing. And the president of IEEE has had many meetings based on that.
Oh, you see, I'm learning things every minute this morning. Thank you for that. I didn't know any of that. I assumed it really had something to do with electrical engineers.
Well, yeah, but more.
More.
But Paul, Paul, I got you. Paul and I can have a private conversation here with other people listening in. Last week, some strategy group of IEEE has got to put together a report on 2050 for the board of directors meeting of IEEE. So they made a mistake and gave me a call. And one of the things I told them on the record, it was recorded, is I sort of like, I don't usually shake my finger, but I got close to shaking my finger. And I said, you guys have got to put together the standards for proper initial conditions of artificial general intelligence. It doesn't exist. It's going to take a long time. It's a very terribly, almost impossibly complex thing. But you, the IEEE, you've got to do it. So I want you to put that in their report to because they're going out to 2050.
Yeah.
Right. So what are the things that they got to tell the board on? So we'll see if it's in there. My guess is it is, because enough heads seem to nod up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one of the areas that worries me is that some of the existential threats seem easy to understand to me, at least with a decent scientific background, and others are very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry knows very well. The two that I worry about all the time are death by climate extinction and death by the internet getting screwed up in 100 ways. For climate extinction, what we now know in the real science is totally overwhelming and clear and simple. I think a kid should understand it. And the fact that national leaders are underestimating the problem even now and doing things that have no relation to solving the problem even now, if we can't get something that simple right, if we can't get the right information to the right place just to stay alive, I worry a lot. I have to say that the internet problems are much more complicated. And there are only a few of us on the earth who understand that math and that system. And if you understand the math and the system, you look at what people are proposing, and these people who are pretending to be experts who don't know what's going on, it really is scary. And I talk to a lot of those experts. I'm in touch with the well-known experts on artificial intelligence. Jerry will immediately think of a few names because he's set up some of these conversations. And what I tell them is, before you believe what you read about artificial intelligence, there's at least a website you should go to, dddas.org. And they have videos of the last conference, last few months. I know the woman who organized it. My wife helped her organize it. And when you look at the leading experts actually implementing artificial intelligence in all sectors of the world, they're all represented pretty much in this meeting, DDDAS, you'll discover cacophony. You'll discover a fragmentation where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. You'll see a world-class expert cited on television who said, no one will ever be able to do X. And then right after him, let me demonstrate X for you. We did it 2 years ago, okay? There's a total lack of communication. There's a lack of integration. And the most advanced technology coming down the pike on AI is actually way beyond anything they know in that conference.
And this is why I wanted the IEEE board to take this on.
So it's an interesting question. The politics of IEEE are very hard because the technical societies provide a lot of the input. The people doing the work in the technical societies have incredible knowledge. And if you talk to them directly, you can learn a lot, as I have just this past year. I've learned things about climate from these people that the world doesn't know. However, when you get to the far edges of the AI, and you go up the hierarchies to headquarters and the people who interface with politicians, there are a lot of people who are professional interfacers who don't always know what's in the societies. It's hard. I mean, you manage 500,000 people, no matter how good you are, there are challenges.
Okay, Paul, is it that there's one place, one, say, algorithm that they've got wrong, and if they fix the math on that one thing, all the other problems will solve it themselves? Or is it more like my vision of the problem, which is that, and it's maybe has nothing to do with what you're talking about, but my problem with the internet is, well, for example, last summer, I spent the whole summer struggling with a computer and calling Apple, and they would spend 7 hours a day with me, with their senior advisors, trying to figure out my problems. And it went on all summer. And finally, I threw the computer away and got a new one. That was the only answer. But every so often, I'll get, and much more frequently nowadays, I'll get to a point where there's a problem I don't know how to solve, and my assistant can't solve it. So we call some experts, and it turns out they can't solve it either, but nobody can solve it. And everything is just so complicated that, it's like they say about marriage, your spouse, you can't live with them and you can't live without them kind of thing. I'm dependent on my computer, but it's getting harder and harder all the time. So that, and this is not one thing, it's that everything is harder and more complicated. And the whole system seems to me, it could explode at any time. It seems so vulnerable.
It could. That's the bottom line. It really could. Just a couple of years ago, we passed a point where, depending on how you define what a robot is, there were more robots than there were humans. That changed like by a factor of 5 or 10 in just a couple of years, from a world of humans to a world of robots. We are right now living in a world of robots. There are more decisions made by computer algorithms and chips than there are by humans. And the system that controls the actions of all of these robots is basically going to run the world. So you ask what's a new way to run the world, I immediately say, I agree with you. We will have a new order, whether we like it or not. These computer systems are controlling all the damn robots, all the physical plants of the entire world, from factories to pacemakers in your body, everything. And the real issue is, will the New World Order include a new design for how to manage and balance and harmonize all of these decision-making systems? Because if we just let the internet evolve randomly, I promise you, it's going to be like being run by metal cockroaches. There was a plan we were working on with NASA on how to automate the moon, and it turns out that you could end up with a whole damn planet run by these metal cockroaches, which would go out of control, we could predict. And we don't want that to happen to Earth. And the only way you can prevent it is have an intelligent, organized, consistent system, which is international, open, and transparent, and based on solid decision principles. So I would say, in a sense, there is a number one program. And that would be the next generation of very highly intelligent decision and control systems to be implemented as an international system where everybody gets to work with it and the rules are clear.
Right. And that's why I say that's got to be IEEE. Where else should that be done?
That's a good question. You know, the prototypes, I've been talking to 2 technical places where they actually begin to maybe understand the prototypes, maybe. And the 2 places that look closest to that, one is in Missouri and one is in Texas. But I don't know what to expect tomorrow. Tomorrow might be a good day. It might be a bad day. I don't know. Is the world going to blow up, or will we save it?
What are those 2 you're talking about?
They would probably be nervous if I named names. We're talking about leading real scientists who don't like to run in front of newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
But the term I like to use is one you've seen. I have a new paper out that sort of gives a global overview. And I call it quantum artificial general intelligence. And I have a paper out there. I don't know if it's even made it to Google Scholar yet. I have a paper out there in this Elsevier journal, which is, of course, I paid open access, on the pathway to quantum artificial general intelligence, extending the best soft computing to give you quantum artificial general intelligence. It starts with, Jerry is rightly skeptical of the AlphaGo technology of DeepMind. And that technology excited a lot of people because it did what people thought was impossible. It beat humans in the strategic game of Go. And I know the guy who actually started them off on that path. But the system he was trying to sell them was sort of the baby version of what we call reinforcement learning and approximate dynamic programming, RLADP, learning to optimize over time. He used the baby version. In engineering today, we have much more powerful systems already working. Mm-hmm. And in China, in 2014, they started a big new research program to implement a roadmap that goes all the way up to the mammal brain level of intelligence. And that roadmap has been published in arXiv, and there's lots of work filling it in. But beyond that is this new roadmap. We can add quantum capabilities to it, and they just change the world. And that's kind of what we've been working on a lot lately.
Can you elaborate at all so that I can get a feel for what you're doing?
Okay. So how do we begin with that? Goals, values. This whole news stream, the powerful artificial intelligence that really works, we can trace it back a lot to the work of the great mathematician John von Neumann. When we were going to go to some kind of interfaith communication session, I said, I'm going to go there. It's held in the local mosque. And my wife said, they're not going to let you in that mosque. Why? You're not one of the people of the book. I said, well, we have many books, but no, that isn't what they wanted. But do you have a book? And I said, yeah, my book would be John von Neumann, Theory of Games and Economic Decisions. And there are a lot of ideas in that book. But his book was just a new mathematical way of implementing ideas that go back to Aristotle. And Aristotle said, sane people try to maximize their happiness. They have an inborn sense of telos, or purpose. We are not just random robots that do randomly what we're programmed to do. We have a system of purpose, and our lives our whole mind is dedicated to following through on our purpose and understanding our purpose and what is our telos. The old AI people wouldn't do much of that. And it was considered heresy. And I said, damn it, I can do it. And I know the math, and it works, and it fits the brain. So what this new mathematics and design is all about is computer systems which follow through and implement this idea from von Neumann, that we are creatures who are kind of born with a sense of purpose. And Jerry will love this. We not only can we express our purpose in metric terms, we call it a utility function, we are born, we are evolved to maximize our purpose over time. And foresight is half of any real brain, any real intelligent system. Any real intelligent system, at least half of it is devoted to foresight. And when you apply this to the human brain, some of us have learned how human brains really work to generate intelligence. We've looked at empirical data, comparing this theory with the older theories of neuroscience. The empirical data are clear. The new theory fits the data better on all the variables we tested. And the new theory says that, about 55% of the human brain is a thing called the neocortex. And the number one function is to learn how to predict the future. It's a foresight machine. It's also an option generation machine. And those are the two functions that make the mammal brain more powerful than the other brains on this planet. So foresight is critical to real intelligence. And if we don't have foresight in our governments and our decision making, they will be stupid and they will do stupid things and they may kill all life on Earth. And that's the way we are. We need to inject a higher level of foresight right in the very foundations of everything we do. Because how can you make the future better if you don't consider the possibilities for what it might be and what the connections are between what you do and what your future will be? So,
right. Now, let me make one little caveat on that. I agree with everything, but one part could be misunderstood. On foresight and the brain's predicting, it doesn't mean it knows the future. It knows the future. Like if I'm driving down a road in a traffic jam, if I go to the left, I predict X will happen. That doesn't mean X will happen. That means if I go down that road, X will happen. I predicted that. Mm-hmm. But I might say that's a bad decision. I'm going to look at the alternative over here and say, I get to the road faster. And I predict that if I take a right turn instead of a left turn, I'll get there faster. So I didn't know the future because the decision was still in there somewhere. So when Paul says predict, it predicts if you do this, you get that. You predict this if you do that. It's not saying we know the future.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you said that. That really helps.
Wow.
Because I've been troubled by the notion that somehow we've got to get a crystal ball, and I don't have any crystal balls. And, let me try out something else that's bothering me. Is it possible that people are crazier now than they used to be? I'm seriously concerned that, okay, I'm 90 years old and I don't remember as many people when I was young who were unable to reason rationally and behave accordingly. I think there is more, if you want to say mental illness, some of it is physiological brain damage or something, or people with, some, God knows what kind of source mental illness has. But some of it is ideological, and some of it is just something like group dynamics where people, want to agree with each other, and they have social pressure on them to not say or think or believe certain things, and so they come up with collective belief system that is patently unreasonable and unrealistic.
Remember that your judgment has evolved over a lifetime. You know, your judgment and your criteria for what's rational has evolved over a lifetime. But let's extend this over humanity. Talk about people walking in lockstep. The majority of people believed their religion said Zeus was a god. I mean, if you take a look at it, the organizing principle of society was a set of beliefs of religion. Now we got organizing principle of the ideology. The governments think they're the thing. And it's pretty soon that the apple versus a non-apple is another. So we've had these evolutions through time. I'm of the opinion that we are much more critically thinking, even though, what does the press tell you? The stupidity. What is if 100 things happen today, and one of them was absolutely stupid and horrible treatment of humans, what's going to be reported today? That. If that's, and it's a normal thing. It's just like you walk down a street, you hit your toe, you go, ouch. Your whole awareness is on that toe. But your digestion is still doing fine. Your heartbeat is still doing fine. Your eyesight is still doing fine, but your toe hurts. And the only thing your consciousness is aware of is pain. So we now have electronic nervous systems of the whole planet so that we all know about the pain wherever it is in the world, which then fills our awareness thinking that that's the only thing going on. So that's exhibit A. Exhibit B, you have this problem of the internet reinforcing your own views. I mean, that's a serious problem. But that's a separate one. But that reinforces, so you creating your silos and so forth. But I have had over 300 to 400 interns over 25 or 30 years, and I have noticed a trend. And one of the trends of all those generations going through my little old outfit here is that there's increasingly sense that I am not going to act in this world unless it's in a situation to improve humanity in general. That was not so much the thing 25 years ago. It says, how do I get a degree to fit in? That's shifted. So I just want to add that in there. Yes, there's a lot of things to criticize about human reasoning and logic and all of that sort of stuff. I agree. But I think that humans in the past were much more in lockstep with their religious beliefs.
Well, I don't know. I won't press the point, but it is a fresh point for me because I spent last night trying to communicate with people in Russia. I have on Facebook a list of maybe 30 Russian friends. Some of them I know well and some of them I don't. Most of my friends tend to be people with very, democratic values and so on. At least they used to be. And when I started putting things on the Facebook postings and sending it, well, I made one post that I sent to a bunch of people or several. And the reaction varied all over the map from people who were very appreciative and recognized what I was saying. And I was simply reporting on, for example, things going on the battlefield in Ukraine now, which they are not allowed to know. They're not officially being told these facts. And so I reported on these simple facts. Some of them appreciated it and were happy to have me share this information. And others just completely flipped out and were angry and obviously very afraid because, they say that if somebody catches this on their Facebook, they could go to jail for 15 years and right. So on. So, but the thing is that some of the delusions that my sane friends, or used to be sane friends, exhibit now are really extraordinary. I mean, real delusions. And I think, well, it's not just Russia, for heaven's sake. I mean, 40% of the US population votes for Trump. That's a clear evidence that something is really wrong, because this is such an obvious, case of, and they believe that the election was stolen and things like that. That believing these things in the absence of any corroborating evidence is pathological, and yet it's such a large percentage of the population that it will win the day very often in any kind of political decision.
Yep.
So I'd like to come back to what you were saying before, that you're worried about, is the world going crazy or isn't it? And how can we know anything about the future? Put those two things together and you'd say, do we know whether the world is going crazy or not? And if so, why? And what affects it? And I have to say, I've had a lot of those same concerns that you guys have, more than you might imagine from just a half an hour of this. I did feel a duty to say, with John von Neumann, perhaps his most famous follower is a guy named Howard Rafa, who developed a thing called decision tree analysis used in industry all over the world. Started out being used in the oil industry. He could tell you how to drill rationally based on probabilities. And the essence of his book is that we are living a life of probabilities. Life is a game of probabilities. So if you say we don't know the future with a definite crystal ball, John von Neumann would say, I spent my whole damn life trying to teach people how to think in terms of probabilities. And Jerry would say, well, there are also alternate scenarios, and that's one way of approaching probabilities. And the core of our new mathematics, you can't get a system to control an airplane effectively if you don't account for probabilities. That's how you would crash if you didn't account for uncertain things perturbing you. So this is a core thing. But human sanity, it's the kind of uncertainty which is more than just throwing the dice. It's a lot about, there are some really deep issues about how do human cultures work and how do they interact?
Mm-hmm.
I've also had a lot of contact with people connected to Russia. Jerry knows that this is an understand. Well, I married a Russian, for God's sake. So, and we spent some time over there and got to know how people think and what the diversities are. And I think it's safe to say that the whole planet has problems of sanity and rationality and paying attention to the future. And the number one thing I try to remember about that, like when I worry about what's happening in the Ukraine, I come back to, what did this guy Jesus say? First of all, work on the splinter in your brother's eye, but look to your own eye. Where do you have blind spots? Where are you missing things? And we are missing things in the United States the same way they are in Russia, the same way they are in China. And we have to learn to work on our own blind spots somehow. And this new computer technology actually could help us overcome our own blind spots, which are very serious.
Okay, that is encouraging, except I don't understand a word of it. How could...
Let me try another way.
Okay.
Let me try another way. When we drive a car, we have what's called a blind spot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that's exactly where you want to see that, whether there's a car there when you move into a lane, which is a shame that we have a blind spot exactly where we need to see so we don't crash into a car as we change lanes. Okay, now along comes AI and sensors, and you can have 360 degrees. So the robot car, one of the reasons the robot cars are theoretically safer than humans, is that unlike a human, it can look in all directions simultaneously. We can't do that. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is always a good deal, but it means that it can fill in literally for the blind spots. It can then, like, for example, we can get, like, if I mistype a spelling in an email, it'll prompt me to say, hey, you misspelled. So AI might be able to help us find those blind spots. If we're saying, here's a situation, and if the AI can take much more data in than I can possibly take in, and saying, hey, Jerry, you forgot about A, B, and C. And I go, well, That's absolutely right. I did forget about A, B, and C. So that's another way of looking at it. And that's not exactly going into the probability part, unless he comes back and saying, look, there's a 20% chance of A, there's a 60% chance of B, but there's a 90% chance of C. So you better pay attention to C first.
How close are we to having something that I can plug in as an app on my computer that'll do that for me?
You do that right now when you Google.
We have a lot of work to do.
When you type in like the UN Secretary General, our common agenda, boom, you're going to get something that you didn't know. It'll fill in a blind spot on UN change. To be simplified on this.
Yeah, one of the first things we can do with the new technology, really simple and Mickey Mouse, but we got to start with tying our shoelaces before we can start, planning our vast voyages. One of the areas where we really need to tie our shoelaces is with this whole business called cyber warfare and cybersecurity. And I was relieved and excited when Joe Biden just the other day finally got together meetings of industry and say, hey, the real problem that's causing us trouble in Ukraine, a lot of it is we don't know what to do about cybersecurity. And by the way, we're vulnerable. And I was so happy he said that, because I've been fighting PR propagandists saying, don't worry about it. We're not vulnerable. We're the leaders of the world. Nobody can touch us. We just want to hurt other people, but we don't need to strengthen the US power grid. Right. Well, it turns out we do, but they've been repressing the information. And now Biden is saying we got to do something. I was excited. But then I read the details of who they empowered to try to sell their goodies to these poor electric power companies. And they didn't even mention the solid technologies, which really could make our power grid safer. Mm-hmm. And I'm amazed that we don't start deploying the first of the two. There are technologies for unbreakable control systems. I guess I could define it in technical terms. I don't know if you want to hear the words. Sometimes I say it's that rainbow book technology. And it's good enough, and it was good enough 20 years ago we could have hardened our power grid. But then there's also a need for the new quantum technology, because people are doing things with your chips and your hardware, and you need to guard against that. But those two things, backdoors in your software and in your hardware, are creating most of the vulnerability, which is really threatening us short term. And it threatens our currency, because all of these cyber currencies are vulnerable to hacking. Not just the power grid, our communication system. We are so damn vulnerable, and we're not doing anything about it, because the people who need to know are not learning the best technology we had last year, let alone the new stuff.
And in parallel to that, we don't have any rules of the road for engagement of cyber warfare. How much destruction, for example, if some of those, if Poland or the United States is either affected by intention or by accident, by mistake, but let's say the power grid gets taken down or the water system gets taken down, how much cyber damage has to be done to a NATO country to declare Article 5, i.e., the whole NATO says, all right, we are at cyber war. What's the line to be crossed? We don't know.
If we got there, what would it look like anyway? I mean, if NATO is preparing for a cyber war, how are they organizing that? I don't know anything about how they're doing that.
Well, first of all, it ought to be damn classified, and I shouldn't know. But
yeah.
But there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can bring, well, it's just like, as you are, well, I don't want to get, there's a lot of different things you can do. Like, for example, you can create what I call honeypots. You're sucking in your opponent, so they're going the wrong direction. And then you're also then striking back. But the question is, one of the questions for me is, it's not an easy answer, is what is a definition of cyber attack that is sufficient to go to war? And I would say, if you're bringing down the electric systems and the water systems and your financial systems, that's war. Now, I suspect that China is trying to tell Russia, don't go too far, because we don't know where the Americans have the line, because they don't know where the line is either. I'm hoping that China can sort of talk some rationality into Putin, but I would say it talk about probabilities. I would say it's very probable that even if a limited cyber war against Ukraine occurs, there would be leakage into other systems.
Well, they're already doing it. They, apparently, banks and things have been hit.
Yeah, I know,
and
but
we
it
haven't
hasn't-
been reading
to
too
my-
much
yeah.
about it. Sorry.
To my knowledge, we haven't brought that hasn't leaked out into Poland or Hungary or Romania or the United States or France or Germany to knock down any systems.
Mhm.
There's cyber attacks going on all the time. As a matter of fact, if your listeners do a Google search on a visual map of cyber attacks, they're going on all the time. But those are not enough to cause enough damage at the moment, other than espionage, to go to war. But we're snuggling up to that at the moment.
Mhm.
So I would say it's a possible. That's why at least it was smart for Biden to start the conversation and to get into the news saying, hey, we could have a cyber war and it can affect you. That's a useful conversation to begin fast.
I'm actually rather surprised that I don't know whether to use the word cyber war, but that a major attack has not already occurred, such that you and I would feel it, not being able to check our bank account and see, how much money we have, for example, or
began their telephone services went down for at least 3 days. I don't know if they ever came back up, but the first few days, telephone in Romania was knocked out.
Mhm.
I didn't see that in the news, but I mean, I consider her a reliable source.
I don't think anybody in North America has felt any personal threat yet. But, when I won't be able to make a phone call or check my bank balance or turn on my cooking stove, I will be much more aware of it. Okay. Well, look, you still haven't told me about one thing, and that is your original proposal that the UN have an office of extinction or something. Prediction.
Right. That's one of the things I didn't get. That's on the list. So one of the 5 elements is a periodic report on strategic threats to civilization. And that includes existential strategic threats. So they'll do the disaster stuff, but also the extinction threats. So to write that report, they're going to have an office. So by inference, our proposal will be implemented. And if Paul fills out our real-time Delphi and put in a UN office of strategic threats, well, then it gets in the report.
Every day, I worry about, are we all going to live or die at the rate we're going? And every day I try to figure out, is there something I could do a little bit better than what I've been doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say I see an easy, clear pathway. I just keep trying each day to figure out, okay, but it's not easy because the information that we need to act on is just not getting to the people who are making the decisions.
And we got to keep working hard ourselves, going back to pointing at ourselves. How do we make this stuff clear, simple, and to the point?
No, that's definitely a major part of it. And my skills are not with communicating to the public. I do what I can, but let's face it, that's not what I spent my life learning to be good at.
Mm.
So I'm hoping I can work with Jerry and he can fill in this gap.
Well, let's say you are the 2 guys in charge of this new Office of Extinction. What are the extinctions that you are foreseeing? And what are you urging us top priority because of probability to do about it? You have about 2 minutes in which to save the world.
IEEE asked me to organize a book connecting the people who really know the material and putting their stories together.
Mhm.
And two of them were people who appear on your show. And I owe you thanks, Metta, for introducing me to them. But the bottom line is I have a list of 4 things I worry about the most. And the 2 on top are the climate extinction and the internet thing. And we have a detailed plan on how do you do the internet right with a new organizing system. And that's not a 2-minute job. It takes a lot of work. And climate seems pretty simple to me, but it seems to be over the heads of most of these people. And they got all these ideological barriers. And then after that, there's misuse of biotech and misuse of nuclear tech, which could kill us all anyway.
Right. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah, I was just updating the state of the future today, beginning work on it. And one of the sentences I just put in there is, although nuclear brinkmanship has re-entered geopolitics, comma, the majority of people are living in peace. It's the first time. It's the first time that nuclear brinkmanship. See, like my interns have lived their whole lifetime without nuclear brinkmanship. They don't. It's not in their bones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But we're now walking back into
Yes.
nuclear brinkmanship.
I was always worried.
Well, I mean, that's what I've spent my last 35 years worrying about most. You know, I spent a lot of time on nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Not that I've been able to make the slightest dent in the issue, but I certainly take it seriously, but
Right.
nobody else has. And what I'm wondering is, what does this do now that Putin is waving these things around and threatening us with them? And does it affect public opinion?
Well, we'll see. It certainly should.
Yeah.
Certainly should.
Unfortunately, it also, he's demonstrating that nuclear weapons are really excellent deterrents, because he's managed to deter
Right.
the U.S. U.S. is not going to go in and help Ukraine with fighting for them, and the Ukrainians, if they had kept the nuclear weapons or even created a new arsenal of their own after they sent them home to Russia at the end of the Cold War, he wouldn't be doing that to them. So he's proving that deterrence works fine, thank you very much, which is not exactly the message that we want to hear. He's also proving that, yes, maybe this is something we should take seriously. The question is, which message is going to get through with the most impact? Are people going to say, I guess we ought to be afraid of these things after all? Or, well, maybe we should get some more nuclear weapons of our own because we want to make sure that we are protected against anybody who might become our enemies in the future.
In my summary for IEEE, I not only list 4 threats, I also say there's a hope element with human potential. And it's harder to talk about the highest hope in human potential because there's so many different views out there, and because it's not trivial. But if I were totally free, I'd certainly put as much energy on that positive side, getting beyond the limits of human development that people now tend to believe in. But we would have to reconcile science and spirit. And that's a big challenge.
Thank you very much. This has been bracing. I hope it's got your energies going for the day. Okay. Carry on, fellas. Nice to see you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode 428. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to the website, look around, because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is the place for dialogue, so please join in. See you there.